This week we got news that the Supreme Court was putting in a ethics guide for itself. And I'm like, wait a second, they don't have that? Like, I don't know, like in journalism, we have an ethics guide. Like, you go to work for an organization, they usually have one. And I would also say that most of us, hopefully, maybe just those of us from another generation, are guided by some principles, right? Because you want to make sure that you are being fair and you don't want to run with false information. It's one of the reasons why I was really surprised that report, the dossier, was ever published. I think BuzzFeed, which no longer exists, was the original one that published that dossier. I looked at the dossier and I felt that it would be highly irresponsible to actually publish something like that because I could not verify it. And there was no way that, I wanted to have such explosive information without some verification process. I say this knowing that when I looked at it, I was like, wait a second, this reads like opposition research, right? This is opposition research. I feel like this is going straight to the reporter at the National Enquirer and they're just going to package it and put it out on grocery store shelves tomorrow. And so as a journalist, you say, okay, let me take a step back here and be more cautious about all of that. And I think probably a lot of those standards have been manipulated. They're being changed. They're being changed in part because of the bias, right, from each side and how much is at stake. And so I think you've seen a lot of corruption within Washington, D.C. and within the media. And I bring this full circle back to the Supreme Court and the news that we got this week, again, because there's no sort of ethic guidelines. I'm like, how can that be, guys? Like, you're just kind of in the most important position in the world, effectively. Like this might matter more, right, than the presidency. This is kind of a big deal. You're on the Supreme Court and you're making $235,000 a year. It might be like $240, it might be $225, but it's in that range. It's like less than $250,000 a year. Now, you say, okay, that's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, but after taxes, right? What is it? Making $120,000 a year there as a Supreme Court justice. Well, let's think through this for a minute. You got 3 kids in school at $50K a pop. Uno, dos, tres. Gosh, that's going to cost you more than you have to take home, right? Like if 50, 100, 150, but you're only taking home 125. So much for that $235,000 salary and all that time working through law school and all that good stuff. It's not enough, right? So I'm sort of amazed that we haven't done more, one, to ensure the ethics of these judges and ensure that they sign on to something. Something somebody said to me the other day was, well, why should they have to? I mean, like, shouldn't this be so incredibly obvious? I'm like, yeah, it should, but apparently it's not. And maybe it's not because these people aren't making any money, and I don't know how they even live in DC and are sending their kids to their fancy schools, given that, by the way, that's not covered by the government, not that I know of, right? So you're relying on the kindness of strangers for your luxury vacations and your private jets. Come on. Like, that's just wrong, fundamentally wrong. I don't care who does it, either side, it's just wrong. And you should have some kind of internal governance, I would think. But whatever we should be doing, right, to just make sure that people can at least pay their bills. I mean, the presidency has not gotten a raise. Donald Trump only took $1. That's how the presidency, by the way, should be, right? Like, you want people that are not in it for the money. But I guess George W. is the first to get the $400K, and that has not gone up since him. So that was a lot of years ago. Prior to that, the presidency paid $200K a year, and the guy who got that was like Nixon. So, I mean, Bidenomics, anyone? Have you heard of inflation? Anyone? So, like, the Supreme Court justices, they get $2,000, $3,000 extra a year. I know that you probably don't have any pity on them, and I'm not saying we should. I'm just saying that there's something kind of warped here because they have a pretty prestigious job. They're not going to be able to live in Washington, D.C., in that surrounding community, which is very, very expensive. Send their kids to the, special schools, all that kind of thing. Not that they should. Maybe we ought to, just here's an idea, actually make our public schools good enough that everybody would want to go there, right?